In this video, we're going to learn some useful frameworks to evaluate the external environment and trends affecting an organization, or more broadly, its industry. Although in this case, we're going to be talking about universities and the higher education system in the United States as the more broad context. In the next few minutes, you're going to learn about a flexible framework that goes by a variety of names and includes several elements you should consider to identify relevant current issues and trends. I'll walk you through the DESTEP model, but there are several similar versions that all do basically similar, all have basically the same goals. They go by different names like PEST, PESTEL, STEEPLE, or SPELIT. These are all different versions of frameworks that help you analyze and understand the external macro environment that an organization operates in, or more broadly, that environment that affects a broader industry. Now, by external environment, we're not talking about the internal operations of a university, its faculty, staff, or students. We're not also talking about the transactions that take place between those internal stakeholders and the partners or external people outside of the university. Instead, these frameworks and models help identify the macro level factors and trends to be aware of. It looks at macro level factors because they can have a massive impact on a university. Now, this is a one-way relationship. Those macro level factors have an impact on the university, but a university's operations don't influence or change the macro environment that it operates in. So what is DESTEP? DESTEP is an acronym that stands for demographic, economic, sociocultural, technological, ecological, and political factors. These categories together make up a very broad review structure that is helpful when scanning the external environment. By looking at issues in a methodical way like this, you can reduce the chances of missing something important that influence the work of a university or the higher ed sector writ large. So let's look at each one of these items and get a flavor for how they work. First is the demographics. Demographic characteristics include trends such as the population growth rate or age distribution or birth rate. Over time, these factors can be particularly important and relevant when considering international student recruitment. Economic factors are determinants of a certain economy's performance and capabilities or financial capacity. This category includes things like economic growth rate or GDP per capita, exchange rates or inflation rates, interest rates over time, disposable income, and unemployment rates, just to name a few. These factors may have a direct impact on U.S. university recruitment since they represent the purchasing power of those families and consumers in international markets or international locations. Now, in a difference between the U.S. higher ed system and the business sectors, these factors don't directly influence pricing levels of degree programs or certificates. Instead, there's an indirect influence that comes out through things like the financial aid policies or scholarship programs. So there's an indirect influence on pricing, but it's not a direct correlation between what the stage of an economic or status of an economic system is and how much tuition level will be at a U.S. university. Looking at sociocultural factors, this includes all the norms, the customs, and the values of a population within which a university operates and from where it seeks international students or partners. This category broadly can also include things like the attitudes towards education, health, career expectations, lifestyle, and other possible cultural barriers to study in the United States. Technological category here focuses on all things that change quickly in the innovation landscape. It also can include things like the regulations surrounding those quick changing technologies, and how they, in particular, how they might influence the higher education sector. Now, these considerations more specifically could include technologies like the coming 5G mobile technology, or it could include things like policies, government policies around the use of or availability and accessibility of social media or social media platforms. Ecological, also called environmental category. This focuses on an increasingly important area in higher education, not only because we seem to be trying to reduce our carbon footprint, but because the local environmental conditions in a given country where there's a partnership or where we want to recruit students from can be factors in deciding whether or not to proceed with a recruitment strategy or with a partnership. We might be looking at issues like short-term weather events or longer-term trends in climate or increases in the number of climate refugees in a given country. These macro-level trends might influence our decisions about outreach and partnership in other countries. And lastly, the political category. Political factors are about how and to what extent a government intervenes in the higher education sector in this case, or more broadly in any sector. How much and what kinds of regulation are present? What kind of role does the government play in our case, in cross-border educational partnerships or activities of a U.S. higher education institution when they are conducted abroad? This is a big category, and it can include very specific things like stability ratios, stability or instability. It could include corruption rankings. It could include consideration of foreign trade policies, tax policies, and other kinds of legal frameworks. In other models besides DESTEP, you might see politics and legal considerations broken out into two separate categories, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's completely fine. If the analysis that you're doing requires or suggests that it would be helpful to separate those, then absolutely, you can certainly modify this and use it in a slightly different way. So bringing these factors all back together, we have a DESTEP analysis framework. Over time, situations in countries change, and the higher education sector changes. Not only that, over time, the priorities of a given institution will change. So a DESTEP analysis that's done today for a certain client or for a certain institution may be very different than a DESTEP analysis that's done in 6 months or 18 months for the same institution. The external environment may have changed around us, and so too the priorities of that institution might change. So when you're using the DESTEP framework or one of the others, you need to try to adapt it and customize it and make it your own for that particular situation. The principles are the same. The categories can evolve, and the specifics within each category are up to the analyst to identify and then to pursue. By following a guide like DESTEP or PESTEL or STEEPLE or any of the others, you can more readily identify important trends and be aware of them and start making decisions by considering those trends rather than being surprised by those trends after some other circumstance has happened or after the decision has been finished.